origin of them all. Once upon a time a rich man and a poor man had a field in common, and they sowed it with the same seed at the same time. But God prospered the poor man's labor and made his seed to grow, but the rich man's seed did not grow. Then the rich man claimed that part of the field where the grain had sprung up, and said to the poor man, "Look now, 'tis my seed that has prospered, and not thine." The poor man protested, but the rich man would not listen, but said to him, "If thou wilt not believe me, then, poor man, come into the field quite early tomorrow morning, before dawn, and God shall judge betwixt us." Then the poor man went home. But the rich man dug a deep trench in the poor man's part of the field, and placed his son in it, and said to him, "Look now, my son, when I come hither tomorrow morning and ask whose field this is, say that it is not the poor man's, but the rich man's." Then he well covered up his son with straw, and departed to his own house. In the morning all the people assembled together and went to the field. And the rich man cried, "Speak, O God, whose field is this, the rich man's or the poor man's?" "The rich man's, the rich man's," cried a voice from the midst of the field. But the Lord himself was among the people gathered together there, and he said, "Listen not to that voice, for the field is verily the poor man's." Then the Lord told all the people how the matter went, and then he said to the son of the rich man, "Stay where thou art, and sit beneath the earth all thy days, so long as the sun is in the sky." So the rich man's son became a mole on the spot, and that is why the mole always flies the light of day. The two princes. There was once upon a time a king who had 2 sons, and these sons went a-hunting in the forest, and they lost themselves. They wandered on and on for 12 weeks, and at the end of the 12 weeks they came to a place where 3 roads met. And the elder brother said to the younger, "My brother, here our roads part. Take thou the road on that side, and I'll take the road on this." Then the elder brother took a knife and stuck it into the trunk of a maple tree by the roadside, and said, "Look now, brother, should any blood drip from the blade of this knife, it will be a sign that I am perishing, and thou must go and seek me. But if any blood flow from the handle, it will be a sign that thou art perishing, and I will then go and seek thee." Then the brothers embraced each other and parted, and one went in one direction, and the other went in the other. The elder brother went on, and until he came to a mountain so high that there cannot be a higher, and he began climbing it with his dog and his stick. He went until he came to an apple tree, and beneath the apple tree a fire was burning, and he stopped to warm himself, when an old woman came up and said to him, dear little gentleman, tie up that dog lest he bite me." So he took the dog and tied it up, and immediately he was turned to stone, and the dog too, for the old woman was a pagan witch. Time passed, and the younger brother came back to the maple tree by the crossroads, and saw that blood was dripping from the blade of the knife. Then he knew that his brother was perishing, and he went in search of him, and came at last to the high mountain that was higher than all others. And on the top of this mountain there was a little courtyard, and in the courtyard an old woman, who said to him, "Little prince, what brings thee hither, and what dost thou seek?" "I seek my brother," said he. "A whole year has passed since I heard of him, and I know not whether he be alive or dead." Then she said to him, "I can tell thee that he is dead, and it is of no use seeking for him, though thou goest the wide world over, but go up that mountain, and thou wilt come to 2 other mountains opposite to each other, and there thou wilt find an old man, who will put thee on thy way." So he went up the high mountain till he came to 2 other mountains that were opposite each other, and there he saw 2 old men sitting. And they asked him straightway, little prince, whither dost thou go? And what dost thou seek?" "I am going in search of my brother," said he, "my dear elder brother who is perishing, and I can find him nowhere." Then one of the old men said to him, "If thou canst scale those 2 mountains yonder without falling, I'll give thee all that thou dost want." Then he scaled the 2 mountains as nimbly as a goat, and the old man gave him a bast rope 3 fathoms long, and bade him return to the mountain where was the fire and the old woman who had asked him to stay and warm himself, and bind this old woman with a cord and beat her till she promised to bring his brother back to life again, and not only his brother but Tsara and Tsaritsa and Tsarevna, who were also turned to stone there. Beat her till she has brought them all to life again, said they. So he took the cord and went back to where the fire was burning. An apple tree was there, and beneath the apple tree was the fire, and the old witch came out to him and said, little master, let me come and warm myself. Do come along, little mother, cried he, come and warm thyself and make thyself comfortable. Then she came out, but no sooner had she done so than he threw the cord around her and began flogging her. Say, cried he, what hast thou done with my brother? Go, dear little master, let me go. Let me go, I'll tell thee this instant where thy brother is. But he wouldn't listen, but beat her, and held her naked feet over the fire, and toasted and roasted her till she shriveled right up. Then he let her go, and she went with him to a cave that was on that mountain, and drew from the depths of it some healing and life-giving water, and brought his brother back to life again, but it was as much as she could do, for she was half dead herself. Then his brother said to him, Oh, my dear brother, how heavily I must have been sleeping, but thou must revive my faithful dog too. Then she revived the faithful dog, and she also revived the Tsar and the Tsaritsa and the Tsarevna, who had been turned to stone there. Then they left that place, and when they had gone a little distance, the elder brother bowed to the ground and went on his way alone. He went on, and until he came to a city where all the people were weeping, and all the houses were hung with black cloth. And he said to them, Why do ye weep? And why are all your houses hung with black? And they answered, Because there's a dragon here who eats the people. And it has come to such a pass with us that tomorrow we must give him our princess for dinner. Nay, but ye shall not do this thing, said he, and with that he set out for the cavern where the dragon lived, and tethered his horse there and slept by the side of the cavern all night. And the next day, sure enough, the princess was brought to the mouth of the cavern. She came driving thither in a carriage and four, and with a heyduck in attendance. But when the prince saw her, he came forth to meet her and led her aside, and gave her a prayer book in her hand, and said to her, Stay here, princess, and pray to God for me. Then she fell down on her knees and began to pray, and the dragon popped one of his heads out of the cavern and said, It is time I had my dinner now, and there's not so much as a breakfast here. But the prince also fell down on his knees and read out of his prayer book and prayed to God, and said to the dragon, Come forth, and I'll give thee breakfast and dinner at the same time. Then the dragon darted back again, but when he had waited till midday and still there was neither breakfast nor dinner for him, he popped two of his heads out and cried, It is high time I had my dinner, and still there is neither breakfast nor dinner for me. Come forth, and I'll give thee both at once, cried the prince. Then the dragon wouldn't wait any longer, but stuck out all his 6 heads and began to wriggle out of the cavern, but the prince attacked him with his huge broadsword, a full fathom long, which the Lord had given him, and chopped off all the dragon's 6 heads, and the rock fell upon the dragon's body and crushed it to pieces. Then the prince gathered up the 6 dragon heads and laid them on one side, and cut out the 6 lolling tongues and tied them in his handkerchief, and told the princess to go back to her palace, for they could not be married for a year and 12 weeks, and if by that time he did not appear, she was to marry another, and with it he departed. Then the coachman of the princess came up to the place and saw the 6 heads of the dragon, and took them up and said to the princess, I will slay thee on the spot if thou dost not swear to me 12 times that thou wilt say I slew the dragon, and wilt take me for thy husband. Then she swore to it 12 times, for else he would have slain her. So they returned together to the town, and immediately all the black cloth was taken off the houses, and the bells fell a-ringing, and all the people rejoiced because the coachman had killed the dragon. Let them be married at once, cried they. Meanwhile the king's son went on, and until he came to the town where he had left his brother, and there he found that the Tsar and the Tsaritsa had given his brother the whole tsardom and the Tsarovna to wife as well. And there he tarried for a time, but toward the end of a year and 12 weeks he went back to the other city where he had left the princess, and there he found them making ready for a grand wedding. "What is the meaning of all this?" asked he. And they answered, "The Tsar's coachman has slain the dragon with 6 heads and saved the princess, and now he is to be married to her." "The good Lord," cried he, "and I never saw this dragon. What manner of beast was it?" Then they took him and showed him the heads of the dragon, and he cried, "Good Lord, every other beast hath a tongue, but this dragon hath none." Then they told this to the coachman, who had been made a prince, and the coachman was very angry and said, "Whoever maintains that a dragon has tongues, him will I order to be tied to 4 wild horses, and they shall tear him to pieces on the open steppe." The princess, however, recognized the king's son, but she held her peace. Then the king's son took out his handkerchief, unrolled it, showed them the 6 tongues, and put each one into one of the 6 mouths of the dragon's 6 heads, and each of the tongues began to speak and bid the princess say how the matter went. Then the princess told how she had knelt down and prayed out of the prayer book while the king's son slew the dragon, and how the wicked coachman had made her swear it 12 times to that which was false. When the Tsar heard this, he immediately gave the princess his daughter to the king's son, and they asked him what death the wicked coachman should die. And he answered, "Let him be tied to the tails of 4 wild horses, and drive them into the endless steppe, that they may tear him to pieces there, and the ravens and crows may come and pick his bones." The ungrateful children and the old father who went to school again. Once upon a time there was an old man. He lived to a great age, and God gave him children whom he brought up to man's estate, and he divided all his goods amongst them. "I will pass my remaining days among my children," thought he. So the old man went to live with his eldest son, and at first the eldest son treated him properly, and did reverence to his old father. "'Tis but meet and right that we should give our father to eat and drink, and see that he has wherewithal to clothe him, and take care to patch up his things from time to time, and let him have clean new shirts on festivals," said the eldest son. So they did so, and at festivals also the old father had his own glass beside him. Thus the eldest son was a good son to his old father. But when the eldest son had been keeping his father for some time, he began to regret his hospitality, and was rough to his father, and sometimes even shouted at him. The old man no longer had his own set place in the house as heretofore, and there was none to cut up his food for him. So the eldest son repented him that he had said he would keep his father, and he began to grudge him every morsel of bread that he put in his mouth. The old man had nothing for it but to go to his second son. It might be better for him there or worse, but stay with his eldest son any longer he could not. So the father went to his second son. But here the old man soon discovered that he had only exchanged wheat for straw. Whenever he began to eat, his second son and his daughter-in-law looked sour and murmured something between their teeth. The woman scolded the old man. "We had as much as we could do before to make both ends meet," cried she, "and now we have old men to keep into the bargain." The old man soon had enough of it there also, and went on to his next son. So one after another all 4 sons took their father to live with them, and he was glad to leave them all. Each of the 4 sons, one after the other, cast the burden of supporting him on one of the other brothers. "It is for him to keep thee, Daddy," said they, and then the other would say, "Nay, Dad, but it is as much as we can do to keep ourselves." Thus between his 4 sons he knew not what to do. There was quite a battle among them as to which of them should not keep their old father. One had one good excuse, and another had another, and so none of them would keep him. This one had a lot of little children, and that one had a scold for a wife, and this house was too small, and that house was too poor. "Go where thou wilt, old man," said they, "only don't come to us." And the old man, grey as a dove was he, wept before his sons, and knew not whither to turn. What could he do? Entreaty was in vain. Not one of the sons would take the old man in, and yet he had to be put somewhere. Then the old man strove with them no more, but let them do with him even as they would. So all 4 sons met and took counsel. Time after time they laid their heads together, and at last they agreed among themselves that the best thing the old man could do was to go to school. There will be a bench for him to sit upon there, said they, and he can take something to eat in his knapsack. Then they told the old man about it, but the old man did not want to go to school. He begged his children not to send him there, and wept before them. Now that I cannot see the white world, said he, how can I see a black book? Moreover, from my youth upward I have never learnt my letters. How shall I begin to do so now? A clerk cannot be fashioned out of an old man on the point of death. But there was no use talking. His children said he must go to school, and the voices of his children prevailed against his feeble old voice. So to school he had to go. Now there was no church in that village, so he had to go to the village beyond it to school. A forest lay along the road, and in this forest the old man met a nobleman driving along. When the old man came near to the nobleman's carriage, he stepped out of the road to let it pass, took off his hat respectfully, and then would have gone on farther. But he heard someone calling, and, looking back, saw the nobleman beckoning to him. He wanted to ask him something. The nobleman then got out of his carriage and asked the old man whither he was going. The old man took off his hat to the nobleman and told him all his misery, and the tears ran down the old man's cheeks. Woe is me, gracious sir, if the Lord had left me without kith and kin, I should not complain, but strange indeed is the woe that has befallen me. I have 4 sons, thank God, and all 4 have houses of their own, and yet they send their poor old father to school to learn. Was ever the like of it known before? So the old man told the nobleman his whole story, and the nobleman was full of compassion for the old man. Well, old man, said he, 'tis no use for thee to go to school, that's plain. Return home, I'll tell thee what to do so that thy children shall never send thee to school again. Fear not, old man, weep no more, and let not thy soul be troubled. God shall bless thee, and all will be well. I know well what ought to be done here. So the nobleman comforted the old man, and the old man began to be merry. Then the nobleman took out his purse. It was a real nobleman's purse, with a little sack in the middle of it to hold small change. Lord, what a lovely thing it was! The more he looked at it, the more the old man marvelled at it. The nobleman took this purse and began filling it full with something. When he had well filled it, he gave it to the old man. Take this and go home to thy children, said he, and when thou hast got home, call together all thy 4 sons, and say to them, my dear children, long ago, when I was younger than I am now, and knocked about in the world a bit, I made a little money. I won't spend it. I said to myself, for one never knows what may happen. So I went into a forest, my children, and dug a hole beneath an oak, and there I hid my little store of money. I did not bother much about the money afterward, because I had such good children. But when you sent me to school, I came to this self-same oak, and I said to myself, I wonder if these few silver pieces have been waiting for their master all this time. Let us dig and see. So I dug and found them, and have brought them home to you, my children. I shall keep them till I die, but after my death consult together, and whosoever shall be found to have cherished me most and taken care of me, and not grudge me a clean shirt now and then, or a crust of bread when I'm hungry, to him shall be given the greater part of my money. So now, my dear children, receive me back again, and my thanks shall be yours. You can manage it amongst you. And surely 'tis not right that I should seek a home among strangers. Which of you will be kind to your old father for money? So the old man returned to his children with the purse in a casket, and when he came to the village with the casket under his arm, one could see at once that he had been in a good forest. When one comes home with a heavy casket under one's arm, depend upon it there's something in it. So, no sooner did the old man appear than his eldest daughter-in-law came running out to meet him and bade him welcome in God's name. "Things don't seem to get on at all without thee, Dad," cried she, "and the house is quite dreary. Come in and rest, Dad." She went on, "Thou hast gone a long way and must be weary." Then all the brothers came together, and the old man told them what God had done for him. All their faces brightened as they looked at the casket, and they thought to themselves, "If we keep him we shall have the money." Then the 4 brothers could not make too much of their dear old father. They took care of him, and the old man was happy, but he took heed to the counsel of the nobleman, and never let the casket out of his hand. "After my death you shall have everything, but I won't give it you now, for who knows what may happen. I have seen already how you treated your old father when he had nothing. It shall all be yours. I say, only wait, and when I die, take it and divide it as I have said." So the brothers tended their father, and the old man lived in clover, and was somebody. He had his own way and did nothing. So the old man was no longer ill-treated by his children, but lived among them like an emperor in his own empire. But no sooner did he die than his children made what haste they could to lay hands upon the casket. All the people were called together and bore witness that they had treated their father well since he came back to them, so it was adjudged that they should divide the treasure amongst them. But first they took the old man's body to church and the casket along with it. They buried him as God commands. They made a rich banquet of funeral meats that all might know how much they mourned the old man. It was a splendid funeral. When the priest got up from the table, the people all began to thank their hosts, and the eldest son begged the priest to say the sweetest, a 40-day prayer in the church for the repose of the dead man's soul. "Such a dear old fellow as he was," said he. "Was there ever any one like him? Take this money for the sweetest, Reverend Father." So horribly grieved was that eldest son. So the eldest son gave the priest money, and the second son gave him the like. Nay, each one gave him money for an extra half sweetest. All 4 gave him requiem money. "We'll have prayers in church for our father, though we sell our last sheep to pay for them," cried they. Then, when all was over, they hastened as fast as they could to the money. The coffer was brought forth. They shook it. There was a fine rattling inside it. Every one of them felt and handled the coffer. That was something like a treasure. Then they unsealed it and opened it and scattered the contents, and it was full of nothing but glass. They wouldn't believe their eyes. They rummaged among the glass, but there was no money. It was horrible. Surely it could not be that their father had dug up a coffer from beneath an oak of the forest, and it was full of nothing but glass. "Why," cried the brothers, "our father has left us nothing but glass." But for the crowds of people there, the brothers would have fallen upon and beaten each other in their wrath. So the children of the old man saw that their father had made fools of them. Then all the people mocked them. "You see what you have gained by sending your father to school. You see he learned something at school after all. He was a long time before he began learning, but better late than never. It appears to us 'twas a right good school you sent him to. No doubt they whipped him into learning so much. Never mind. You can keep the money and the casket." Then the brothers were full of lamentation and rage. But what could they do? Their father was already dead and buried. Ivan the Fool and St. Peter's, Fife. There was once upon a time a man who had 3 sons, and 2 were clever, but the third, called Ivan, was a fool. Their father divided all his goods among them and died, and the 3 brothers went out into the world to seek their fortunes. Now the 2 wise brothers left all their goods at home, but Ivan the Fool, who had only inherited a large millstone, took it along with him. They went on and until it began to grow dark, when they came to a large forest. Then the wise brothers said, "Let us climb up to the top of this oak and pass the night there, and then robbers will not fall upon us." "But what will this silly donkey do with his millstone?" asked one of them. "You look to yourselves," said Ivan, "for I mean to pass the night in this tree also." Then the wise brothers climbed to the very top of the tree and there sat down, and then Ivan dragged himself up too, and the millstone after him. He tried to get up as high as his brothers, but the thin boughs broke beneath him, so he had to be content with staying in the lower part of the tree on the thicker boughs, so there he sat, hugging the millstone in his arms. Presently some robbers came along that way, red-handed from their work, and they too prepared to pass the night under the tree. So they cut them down firewood, and made them a roaring fire beneath a huge cauldron, and in this cauldron they began to boil their supper. They boiled and boiled till their mess of pottage was ready, and then they all sat down round the cauldron and took out their large ladles, and were just about to fall to. In fact, they were blowing their food because it was so boiling hot, when Ivan let his big millstone plump down into the middle of the cauldron, so that the pottage flew right into their eyes. The robbers were so terrified that they all sprang to their feet straightway and scampered off through the forest, forgetting all the booty of which they had robbed the merchantmen. Then Ivan came down from the oak and cried to his brothers, "You come down here and divide the spoil." So the wise brothers came down, put all the merchandise on the backs of the robbers' horses, and went home with it, but the only thing that Ivan was able to secure for himself was a bag of incense. This he immediately took to the nearest churchyard, placed it on the top of a tomb, and began to pound away at it with his millstone. Suddenly St. Peter appeared to him and said, "What art thou doing, good man? I am pounding up this incense to make bread of it." "Nay, good man, I will advise thee better. Give me the incense, and take from me whatever thou wilt." "Very well, St. Peter," said the fool, "thou must give me a little fife, but a fife of such a sort that whenever I play upon it, every one will be obliged to dance. But dost thou know how to play upon a fife?" "To know, but I can soon learn." Then St. Peter drew forth a little fife from his bosom and gave it to him, and took away the incense, and who can say where he went with it? But Ivan stood up and gazed at the sky and said, "Look now, if St. Peter hath not already burnt my incense and made of it that large white cloud that is sailing above my head." Then he took up his fife and began to play, and the moment he began to play, everything around him began to dance, the wolves and the hares and the foxes and the bears, nay, the very birds lit down upon the ground and began to dance, and Ivan went on laughing and playing all the time. Even the savage, surly bears danced and danced till their legs tottered beneath them. Then they clutched tight hold of the trees to stop themselves from dancing, but it was of no use, dance they must. At last Ivan himself was tired, and lay down to rest, and when he had rested a little, he got up again and went on into the town. There all the people were in the bazaars, buying and selling. Some were buying pancakes, others baskets of bright-coloured eggs, others again pitchers of kvass. Ivan began playing on his fife, and forthwith they all fell a-dancing. One man who had a whole basket of eggs on his head danced them into bits, and danced till he looked like the yolk of an egg himself. Those who were asleep got up and gave themselves up to dancing straightway. There were some who danced without trousers, and some who danced without smocks or shirts, and there were some who danced with nothing on at all, for dance they must when Ivan began a-playing. The whole town was turned upside down, the dogs, the swine, the cocks and hens, everything that had life came out and danced. At last Ivan was tired, so he left off playing and went into the town to seek service. The parson there took a fancy to him, and said to him, "Good man, wilt enter my service?" "To that will I, gladly," said Ivan. "How much wages dost thou want by the year then?" "It won't come dear. 5 cob of answer coins are all I ask." "Good. I agree," said the parson. So he engaged Ivan as his servant, and the next day he sent him out into the fields to tend his cattle. Ivan drove the cattle into the pastures, but he himself perched on the top of a haystack while the cattle grazed. He sat there, and sat till he grew quite dull, and then he said to himself, "I'll play a bit on my fife, I haven't played for a long time." So he began to play, and immediately all the cattle fell a-dancing, and not only the cattle, but all the foxes, and the hares, and the wolves, and everything in the hedges and ditches fell a-dancing too. They danced and danced till the poor cattle were clean worn out and at the last gasp. In the evening Ivan drove them home, but they were so famished that they tugged at the dirty straw roofs of the huts they passed, and so got a chance mouthful or two. But Ivan went in and had supper and a comfortable night's rest afterward. The next day he again drove the cattle into the pastures. They began grazing till he took out his fife again, when they all fell a-dancing like mad. He played on and until evening, when he drove the cattle home again, and they were all as hungry as could be, and wearied to death from dancing. Now the parson was not a little astonished when he saw his cattle. "Where on earth has he been feeding them?" thought he. "They are quite tired out and almost famished. I'll take care to go myself tomorrow and see exactly whither he takes them, and what he does with them." On the third day the neatherd again drove the cattle into the pastures, but this time the parson followed after them, and went and hid himself behind the hedge near to which Ivan was watching the cattle graze. There he sat then, and watched to see what the man would do. Presently Ivan mounted onto the haystack and began to play, and immediately all the cattle fell a-dancing, and everything in the hedge, and the parson behind the hedge danced too. Now the hedge was a quickset hedge, and as the parson began capering about in it, he tore to shreds his cassock and his breeches, and his underskirt, and his shirt, and scratched his skin and wrenched out his beard as if he had been very badly shaved. And so the poor parson had to go on dancing in the midst of the prickly hedge till there were great wheals and wounds all over his body, and the red blood began to flow. Then the parson saw he was an evil case, and shrieked to his herdsman to leave off playing, but the herdsman was so wrapped up in his music that he did not hear him, but at last he looked in the direction of the hedge, and when he saw the poor parson skipping about like a lunatic, he stopped. The parson darted away as fast as his legs could carry him toward the village, and oh, what a sight he looked as he dashed through the streets. The people didn't know him, and scandalized that anybody should run about in rags and tatters so that his whole body could be seen, began to hoot him. Then the poor man turned aside from the public road, crawled off through the woods, and dashed off through the tall reeds of the gardens, with the dogs after him. For wherever he went they took him for a robber, and hounded on the dogs. At last the parson got home, all rags and tatters, so that when his wife saw him she did not know him, but called to the labourers, "Help, help, here's a robber, turn him out." They came rushing up with sticks and cudgels, but he began talking to them, and at last they recognized him, led him home, and he told his wife all about Ivan. The parson's wife was so amazed she could scarce believe it. In the evening Ivan drove home the oxen, put them into their stalls, gave them straw to eat, and then came into the house himself to have supper. He came into the house, and the parson said to him, "Come now, Ivan, when thou hast rested a bit, play my wife a little song." But as for the parson, he took good care to tie himself first of all to the pillar which held up the roof of the house. Ivan sat down on the ground near to the threshold and began to play. The parson's wife sat down on the bench to listen to him while he played, but immediately she leaped up from the bench and began to dance, and she danced with such hearty girdle that the place became too small for her. Then the devil seemed to take possession of the cat too, for pussy leaped from under the stove and began to spring and bound about also. The parson held on to the pillar with all his might, but it was of no use. He had no power to resist. He let go with his hands, and tugged till the rope that held him grew slacker and slacker, and then he went dancing round and round the pillar at a furious rate, with the rope chafing his hands and feet all the time. At last he could endure it no longer, and bawled to Ivan to stop. "The deuce is in thee," cried he. Then Ivan stopped playing, put his fife into his breast pocket, and went and lay down to sleep. But the parson said to his wife, "We must turn away this Ivan tomorrow, for he will be the death of our souls and our cattle." Ivan, however, overheard what the parson said to his wife, and getting up early in the morning, he went straight to the parson, and said to him, "Give me 100 carbovants, sir, and I'll be off. But if you won't give them to me, I'll play and play till you and your wife have danced yourselves to death, and then I'll take your place and live at mine ease." The parson scratched himself behind the ears and hesitated, but at last he thought he had better give the money and be quit of him. So he took the 100 carbovants out of his satchel and gave them to Ivan. Then Ivan played them a parting song till the parson and his wife fell down to the ground, dead beat, with their tongues lolling out of their mouths. And then he put his fife into his breast pocket and wandered forth into the wide world.